Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Will. Today we're not going to be fishing, we're going to be going through my setup and I'm going to show you how we've got things rigged, the engines that we use, the trolling motor that I use, the rod trees, the downriggers, kind of the whole thing. So if you're someone that's getting started with salmon fishing, there's just a lot to this. So yeah, without further ado, I guess let's get to it. Let's start walking through the boat. First thing we're going to talk about is like the rod holders themselves. So what we've got here is this base track, which is going to be kind of the start of any rod holder setup for the most part. This is a Burt's Tackle 48-inch rod track. It has a few bolts that run through the gunnel, and then underneath we've got a piece of 3/4 inch plywood that runs the length and maybe a little bit further and wider than this 48-inch track. And then what we do is we run some nuts and washers on the underside of the gunnel up to this track so that it's completely secure. There's going to be a lot of tension that's going to be pulling onto this track as you're trolling, and so you want to make sure that the track attached to the gunnel is like super secure so that anything that you put in it can be run without risk of damaging your gunnel or completely just ripping off your boat. We'll start at the front. So this is a rod tree. I've got 3 holders. You can use a 4th. I'll show you here. So when I'm storing the boat or when I'm running out to my spot, I leave them turned like this. When I'm ready to fish though, I just go ahead and I turn the screw and I turn this guy here. And then I have this rod tree, which I use for typically my lead core rods or planer board rods. If you're running, copper or lead, anything that's got a planer board, this is where I would store those rods here. When you're trolling, you always want to run your shallowest line on top. So if I was running all 3 here and I was running 3 lead core lines, I'd probably put my 10 color in the bottom here, maybe a 5 color in the middle, and then my 2 or 3 color up top. The next is going to be our Dipsy rod holders. I did a video on this. If you're interested in learning about the Dipsies, you can go check that out. But these right here kind of run low like this, and these will be for your 2 Dipsy diver rods in the setup. And then lastly, you've got the downrigger. So I run Cannons and I just run manual downriggers. The automatic ones are nice, but that's a pretty big power draw on the battery system that you have in your boat. So essentially I've got these on just this, what is it? Yeah, this is also a Burt's Tackle mount. You just pull this lever and then I can swing these guys out to whatever I want. When I'm storing it, I just leave it like this. And when I'm ready to fish, I just crank it out just like that. I use the rod holder that comes with the Cannon mount. I know other guys will use a system where they put a rod holder like this and they'll maybe put their downrigger pull in this rod here, just because either A, they don't trust the plastic holder here, or it just gives them some more flexibility in their boat. I've been using these like my whole life and I've never had a problem with them. I've never had them break. As long as there's not something like visually wrong with the plastic or cracks in the plastic, I would say you're probably just fine using them the way that they are. I'll show you next while we're back here, and I'm going to talk about electronics a little bit later on, but while I'm here you can see I've got this little depth radar screen, and this is Depth Radar's company that makes a temperature and speed probe so that you know what temperature and speed your baits are running at a specific portion in the water column. What this screen does is it partners up with this probe. This is Depth Radar's model. You'll also see a lot of guys using Fishhawk is the other brand that makes a really well-known temperature and speed probe. But essentially this screen transmits information. You'll see the speed and you'll see the temperature that this probe is running at. What we do here is we connect this to our downrigger cable. We take the downrigger weight, which is, I have a 12-pound weight, and I attach that here. And then here we actually attach our depth radar probe itself. The depth radar probe is just powered by, I think it's a D battery. Let me just take it out and show you. Yeah, I just use a Duracell. It's a 9-volt battery. You gotta make sure it's going in the right way here. It doesn't cause you problems. Put a little Vaseline there on the inside of these threads just to make sure that this is all watertight. You don't want that battery getting exposed to any kind of moisture. So anyway, we clip it in here to our downrigger, and you'll notice on this downrigger, I've got this coated cable here, and this is super important because the way that this screen gets the information from the probe, it's not transmitted via Bluetooth with the depth radar. This is actually transmitted through this cable and through this coated cable all the way up here to this here. And this is actually what's reading the information, and it's going to display here on the screen. If you get a nick in this cable, or if there's just exposed cable where the signal from this to this is interrupted, you're not going to get a good reading. I see a lot of guys complain that their depth readers aren't working. It's likely because you've got a nick in your cable somewhere where the transmission is being interrupted. That's what we use this for. I've talked about this in other videos. If you don't have a depth radar or a fish hawk or some sort of temperature and speed probe, you're really fishing fairly blind. I believe that the depth radar is maybe 400 or 450 bucks. Fish hawk might be like 600 or 650 now, I'm not sure. But if you don't have one, I would invest in this before any of the other stuff, Panoptics or any of the other stuff. I would get your depth radar set up or your fish hawk set up so that you can see the temperature and the speed where you're fishing in the water column. We'll do just a short piece here on the engines. So we've got our big boy engine, and then we've got our kicker. When I was a kid, we used our 90 horse 4-stroke Yamaha to troll. That worked really well because we could get that thing to idle down to a fairly low RPM at a comfortable level where we could keep the boat at the right speed. That's really the big thing. If you have an engine where you can get down to anywhere from like 1.5 to 3 miles an hour comfortably without the engine working too hard or burning through spark plugs, that's great. This engine here though is not meant for idling low like that at low RPMs, and there's really no way that I feel comfortable running this down at trolling speeds at 1.5 miles an hour up to 3 miles an hour. So it's almost essential that you have this kicker here. So this kicker here is just a Mercury. It's a 9.9 4-stroke made by Tohatsu, and it works really well. It came with the boat. I put a steering cable between, I'll show you. I put a steering cable. It hooks up here on the big engine, and then I connect that here, and that way I can sit at the helm and use my steering wheel to just fine tune and adjust the kicker. When we're setting up though, and I get the kicker running, what I typically do is I try to get the kicker to about 1.5 miles an hour, and I keep it straight. So I straighten it out so that the boat would just continue in a straight line if I didn't alter it at all. And then I'll show you, to get the extra speed and steering that I want, I use the trolling motor up at the front of the boat. And I do this for a few reasons I'll explain. Okay, so the other component when you're trolling, obviously speed is super important. So like I said, what I do is I use the kicker at the back to just power the boat forward, and I get that to about 1.5 to 2 miles an hour. Now the rest of the speed, if you're aiming to get to that 2.2 to 2.7 range for your speed on surface, I use this trolling motor up front. This is a Motor Guide, it's an XI5. It pairs with my Lowrance at the helm, and this particular model, yeah, it's an 80-pound thrust with a 24-volt system. So you probably don't need 80-pound thrust, but this is a little bit of a larger boat, and I think that it's probably better to go a little bit stronger just to make sure that you can always have sufficient power on the Great Lakes. This is a longer shaft. It's a deep V boat, so you want to make sure that when you're bouncing through the waves, that those propellers on the trolling motor are always in the water. So that's why we use this, and the reason it's so important to have this is kind of twofold. A, it allows you to fine-tune your speed rather than trying to adjust that kicker motor back there, which can be a little bit finicky. So this trolling motor allows me to just click up or down ever so slightly so that I can get right in the sweet zone of like 2.2 to 2.7 miles an hour, and I can adjust it depending on the direction and the current, depending on what my electronics are telling me about speed. The other thing that's really nice about having some of the newer model trolling motors, whether it's Minn Kota or Motor Guide, is that you have the ability to do a heading lock. So if I'm fishing 120 feet of water and I want to go north, I can point this thing north and I can just lock it. And regardless of the waves, regardless of the way the boat wants to move, this is going to do all the adjustments for me so that I can focus on the rods, I can focus on reeling in fish, I can focus on what other boats are doing, and I'm not worried about steering the boat. Once I've got that heading lock, it does the work for me, and the only time that I need to take it off of that heading lock and do anything manual is if there's other boats around that I need to make a turn or make a maneuver away if someone else has the right of way. So that's how we usually run this. When we're running a contour line or a depth, we basically get on that depth, we put the heading lock on, and we let the trolling motor and the kicker power the boat. And then I'm always watching my depth radar and my Lowrance to make sure that my speed at the ball where my baits are is good. So that's how we pair it up. I highly recommend having a motor guide or a Minn Kota up front to do some of this work for you. While we're up here, and by the way, I'm not sponsored by anybody in this video. I'm showing you what I use, what's worked well for me. I'm not saying any of this stuff is the best. There's always other options, but I am very fond of my Superior Fishing Products gear. So when you're trolling the Great Lakes, obviously you're gonna have 10, 12, 15, however many rods sitting in the boat. So I highly recommend having something to store the rods in. Superior Fishing Products makes really good stuff. It's light, brushed aluminum, it looks great. They have all sorts of different options on their website. So this is what I use for a rod holder. It gives me 8 spots, maybe one in the middle for a net if you want. But you can see how like easily this just comes out like that, locks in. You turn this here and I can spin it around how I need it. So it's a pretty nice feature to have. If you're gonna be on the Great Lakes, you know you're gonna be taking along with you just a ton of rods on any given trip. I would just recommend that you have some place to put them. Otherwise you're gonna have your rods banging around in the boat, you're gonna have stuff tangling, you're gonna have line getting caught on things. It's just a mess. So I do recommend just to keep your stuff organized, keep it clean, keep it from tangling, just get something that you can organize them with. All right, for electronics, nothing fancy. I've got the Lowrance. This is the TI-9. The reason I use the Lowrance interface, or the Lowrance system, is because it interfaces with the motor guide up front. The comparison would be like Humminbird and Minn Kota. I don't really have a preference either way. If you guys do, feel free to leave a comment as to why you like one pairing over the other. But this gives me like everything I need. It gives me, you know, my maps. It gives me my sonar, side scan. It's nothing crazy. If I was a bass fisherman or something, maybe I would invest in like live scope, but for trolling salmon, I really don't think it's all that important, which might be a good thing. So if you're setting up your boat for the first time, I think electronics can be really intimidating. There's so many options, it's expensive, but I really do believe you can probably get in with more of an entry-level version of some of these electronics, just so long as you pair it with your trolling motor and that these connect via the NEMA 2000 connection. This allows me to control what my motor guide does up front while sitting here. You can also use your motor guide remote, which is nice to have on your body at all times, but this also allows me to fine tune. I can see how fast my motor guide is running. I can see my speed on the surface all in the same spot. Nothing crazy. This is all I have. This is the only screen I have on the boat, but it works really well for us. So I do recommend just making sure that you have something that pairs with your system up front. Next, we're just gonna talk about the net. This net, like this is all it is. So I'm not quite 6 foot, it's probably like a 7 foot net. It collapses pretty wide. I think it's actually meant to be a musky net. I love this net, it's sturdy. I feel like it gives me good range. It collapses so it stores nice in the boat. It's aluminum, it's light. If you watch like the Bruce City videos, we were using a longer handled blue net. That's actually my buddy's net that he let us borrow for that, my buddy Adrian. That net was actually really nice. So while I'm standing here telling you that I really like this net and that you don't need a long net necessarily, I will say that having that longer net saved probably a few fish from getting off at the side of the boat for the last couple trips. I know it's not part of the boat, but I do think it's really important to talk about like some safety gear. So years ago, my dad and I switched to Mustang life vests. They're so much less bulky. I'm sure there's other brands out there too, but they're so much less bulky than some of the traditional life vests. And I know we're not necessarily required to wear life vests while we're out on the water, but every year you hear about somebody. I think 2 years ago there was a younger guy that lost his life going in for like a net job. He slipped, went into the drink, and I don't think his buddies were able to get him in time, and he exhausted himself and he drowned on the Great Lakes. And this happens probably more than it should. So if you're out there, you know, no fish is worth your life. It's no different than like ice fishing and taking precautions there. These life jackets though, they don't get in the way. They're so easy and light. They don't restrict your arm movement. They're a little bit on the pricey side, but honestly, if you ever needed it and it saved your life, it would seem like such a small price to pay. So we do our best to wear them. I like the Mustang stuff, but wear your life jackets. It's definitely just a good thing to have on board beyond just what's required by the Coast Guard. So, all right, so hopefully that was helpful. If you have questions about the setup, or if you're getting your boat rigged for fishing now or in the future, leave a comment as to questions you might have. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can on those. But yeah, this is just what works for me in our boat. It's just about 21 feet. And it's kind of tricky because I know a lot of you guys probably do salmon fishing, but you also do walleye fishing and bass fishing. And salmon fishing can kind of engulf the boat a little bit. You know, you get the rod trees on the side, you get the gear up front. It's like, kind of takes over the whole use case of the boat. But the nice part about these rod trees and things is that you can take all this stuff off. It's just a little bit tedious. So yeah, if you have questions, put them below. But I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully this was somewhat helpful, just getting a rundown of what works for me. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. Again, my name is Will, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.